Hey guys, what's up? So this one's just for the guys watching on YouTube. Usually, my YouTube is just gonna be a lot of stream recordings of, what you can see on Twitch, and it's just like, I don't do a lot of just like standalone recordings just for you YouTube guys. But in this case, I kind of feel like I have to a little bit because, this is a topic that I've mentioned a few times on my stream, and you probably have known little bits and pieces if you watch that. But effectively, I want to talk in this video about how I'm feeling about Underlords, what I plan on doing for the next couple of months. It's hard to plan ahead of that, to be perfectly honest, and how exactly we got here. So I want to be clear, this is not a declaration of quitting, not precisely. It's basically me looking at the design direction of Underlords, not really liking a lot of things about it, or a lot of things about Valve's process lately, and not really feeling as excited about the big update as I was originally. It actually feels a very similar process to, I was thinking the other day, it feels very, very reminiscent of Gwen Homecoming, actually a little bit of what happened during Artifact, which is specifically Gwen Homecoming, it launched, it was really hype for 3 or 4 days, and then I slowly started to see a lot of what I would consider to be design flaws that really hurt my ability to like the game in terms of its long-term prospect. I want to be very clear about that. This is not a meta bad swim sad video. That's not what this is. I think that would be pretty ludicrous that anyone complaining about the current meta would overreact in that way. Anyway, I want to talk first because I do want to get into where I feel like the design direction of this game went astray. I think that's pretty important, and I've talked for a long time on my stream, a long time, over an hour, about all the different design flaws in this game. For those of you guys that are actually interested in that, I do want to actually talk about that, but I want to put that kind of at the back of the video. For now, I just want to kind of mention basically the long story short. It's a very long story. I think a lot of the things just make me, not really enjoying Underlords as much. There was a tournament yesterday that I literally just kind of skipped on. Every time I play the game, it feels just it feels hard to not be fairly negative about a lot of things, and it just makes me want to do something else in the last week or so. And if you play a lot of Underlords, if you browse the subreddit, I mean, I'm obviously not the only one with this issue. The streamers have basically left the game already. Savich and Gara don't play anymore. I would be pretty surprised if either of them touched the game again, to be honest. Even if they do, it'll probably be really minor, right? So I mean, and that's kind of where I'm getting some Artifact vibes. I joked on my stream that Swim is usually one of the last ones to leave. And someone in my chat was saying that's why it's scary that's why people don't like it when I stop playing games, because I'm like the fourth horseman, right? I'm the last harbinger of the apocalypse, because everyone else is smart enough to leave early. So when I leave, that's when that's when you know it's done. And honestly, that is a little true. But yeah, again, this is not me saying I'm quitting Underlords. So how I want to do this is I don't know. I mean, I plan on personally reading patch notes. And I do think I'll play the game here and there. I'm not really sure. People are always wanting to know what are my plans. I don't really have plans. I just kind of do what I feel like and what you guys request that I do. I mean, on one hand, I really want to be able to, make you guys happy, and a lot of you guys just want to watch me play Underlords as much as I want to play Underlords. Sorry, I said that backwards. As much as I would like to be a professional streamer and do what my viewers want, I don't know. I find myself these days, whenever I try to play it, it feels just I would rather be doing something else that wasn't, Underlords. And that's, you know, maybe that's a problem I have to deal with. That's always been weird to me, by the way. I just want to, like, before I go on, I want to talk about that. That's been so strange to me that people, like, a lot of people look at, like, streamers switching games and be like, well, you're being selfish for switching to a game that your viewers want you to watch, or that your viewers want to watch. And that's, like, it's so insanely backwards. It's kind of funny, honestly. Because, like, I mean, I think what I'm doing right now is incredibly selfish. I think a lot of you guys want to watch me play Underlords, and I can't tank that, you know. Like I just, like, I want to be spending time, and you'll have seen a couple of the games I've been playing on this channel. You'll have seen, like, you know, me messing around with Mythgard or Hearthstone Battlegrounds. I'll probably check out TFT for a little bit. I don't plan on getting stuck on that, but I mean, I want to try it, give it like a real chance more than just like because I tried it for like 4 hours before, Runeterra, and I don't know. I mean. From my perspective, doing all those things is selfish, and I understand that, like, viewers are where the money's at, but also, like, nobody gets into streaming because they want to just, like, fucking literally, like, Scrooge McDuck in a fucking golden bathtub. Like, we're all gamers here. Like, who the hell actually wants who's going to be able to, like, there's no, like, mansion. Like, the whole point of me being like a professional gamer full time is, like, I don't really care about, like, that kind of thing. So it's just, sorry, it's minor tangent, but it's a little strange to be associated in that way. But yeah, no, like I said, people have it backwards. When I just, like, stop playing a game that people want to watch me play, just so I can play what I want, that's when people should be yelling at me for being selfish. And if that's what you want to do, then, you know, I'm fine with that, because I think it is pretty selfish. But yeah, so I don't know. Anyway, that was a little tangent I wanted to do. And then, yeah, for the next, like, couple of months, I don't really know what I'm gonna do. Those are some games I want to try out. I'll probably try out some other games. Maybe that Teppin thingy. I don't know. Give a little bit more of a chance to Magic the Gathering. Who knows? I'll probably try a lot of things, and it's actually kind of nice to have, like, moments where, you know, you have an opportunity to just kind of mess around and play a lot of, like, side things, at least for me, because my pattern is, you know, obviously a lot more just like, you know, this is my main thing, I do content on this, and then I maybe after like a year or two, you know, things die, I move on to this. So yeah, long story short, and sorry this is rambly, but yeah, I mean, you understand at this point what you've got yourself into. Long story short, with Underlords, you know, I mean, I will check out, I hope things get better. I will be checking out, like, you know, balance patches, doing reviews on some stuff, and I mean, this is, again, I'm not saying, like, I'm quitting the game, but I'm gonna start messing around with some other things on the side, and I don't know how I feel about a lot of things. I mean, I want to check out the patches. I want to see how things progress, but I think it would probably take a lot to resolve a lot of, like, the directional problems that this game has. Okay, and now that I've kind of, like, I mean, this is, like, the channel update portion of the video. I mean, and it's not much of an update, don't get me wrong. I'm basically just saying, like, don't be surprised to see, you know, like, whatever Swim plays whatever game instead of, like, a lot of Underlords for the next, like, few months. Well, and you know, I'm looking forward to Runeterra the most. I guess that's part of, like, my channel update. Runeterra actually looks like it'll be a pretty sweet game, and there's a good chance I'll end up playing that. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'll play it and then they'll mess it up, and then I won't play. I have no idea. Like, I wish I could tell you my plans. I wish I could. I don't have plans. I just have, like, things that I'm more likely than other things. I mean, that's basically it. So yeah, that's my channel update. And now for the next long ass time, I don't see the timestamp of this video, but you do. It's until the end of the video. It's a long ass time, isn't it? I bet it's like 30 minutes or some shit. But yeah, for the next long ass time, let's talk about why I feel like the design direction of Underlords is a little, well, to be frank, quite a lot flawed. A lot of things that I would personally have done differently, and why I'm feeling this way. Because this is not just like some random, oh, Swim said. I actually want to kind of express my thoughts, and I think a lot of you guys might actually be agreeing with a lot of what I'm saying in this video. Okay, we're gonna start off easy. I'm gonna go ahead and switch to a Nesix over here, just so you guys don't have to be staring at Hobgen this entire time. You're welcome, boys. All right, so let's actually delve into some of the issues. Firstly, let's just talk about Underlords themselves. These two characters, Hobgen and a Nesix, and what exactly is wrong about them? Now, I know this is actually something that people have been discussing. People have mentioned on Reddit, like, you know, I wish Underlords weren't just like fighters on the board. I wish they kind of did something that contributed to your game plan. I completely agree with that, actually. I think they could have been implemented as board characters in a better way, and that could have been an option that the devs pursued, but I think they definitely didn't need to be, and what they contribute to the game is fairly straightforward and not really adding anything to the gameplay, right? The whole point of this is supposed to enhance the core gameplay. So the biggest problem I have is that you choose your Underlord before the game starts. I think this is just a fundamental flaw and doesn't belong anywhere close to this genre. Another issue I have is just like the general concept of the Underlords themselves. It doesn't really seem to add anything, right? So let's back up. The core concept of this genre is very simple. It's a probability game where, you know, your player choices are forcing you to, you know, you have to be thinking about, you know, the past and the future with your player decisions, right? I'll get more into that later, but basically the whole point of probability games is that you want to give the player some agency without giving them too much agency, right? Because when you have too much player agency, you get sort of degenerate stuff where play rates and win rates get really, really skewed, right? So, for example, the idea of picking something before the draft begins, before any randomness, is incredibly antithetical to that. So, what I would say, and this is very, very straightforward, the core philosophy that a game like this should pursue, like this should be driving every single decision that the game ever makes, is that you want to couple player agency with probability. You want to mesh this together, and there's one specific way you want to do that in particular, which is usually you're going to want to be sort of sandwiching the player agency between forms of probability. So what I mean by that is effectively you have some probability, any action that the player makes, there should be some probability before that action and some probability after that action, right? So, for example, let's get into this. You want to basically do this to maximize the complexity of the decision, right? Because the decision should be, okay, some RNG has happened before this. We need to respond reactively to what has happened in the past and figure out, okay, how has these factors influenced my decision? But then you also need to look forward in time, and you need to be thinking, okay, so these things could happen in the future, and I have to factor what could happen into my decision as well. That's where you get complex decisions. That's where you get nuanced thought. So the problem with Underlords is very straightforward. You pick them before anything happens. This is a horrendous flaw that makes no sense, right? The biggest problem with this flaw, you might be thinking, oh, like, what's the big deal? Here's the problem. Here's the symptom, and this is what's creating issues. The symptom is you're gonna end up with a skewed metagame, right? For the last 2 weeks, we've had metas where I have seen I play like 8 games a day, and I see 1 Hobgen per day. So I'm seeing like 63 NSXs and 1 Hobgen per day on average. When people figured out NSX was just better. Right now, it's a couple days after they just nerfed NS6 and buffed Hobgen, and I think Hobgen's a bit better. I think most people agree with that. And ever since Hobgen is a little bit better, you know, people are picking more Hobgen. But it's not going to be even or really close to even, right? There's like 6 or 7 Hobgens per game and like 1 or 2 NS6 per game now. And there's a couple where, you know, I mean, it's not like you'll never see like 4 and 4 or 5 and 3. But, I mean, for the most part, it's really, really hard to balance these. Why? It's really simple. Because when you have a situation where you pick the Underlord before going into a game, there will always be a mathematically correct choice between the two every time. That will always happen. There's a reason you see draft games never do this. So, I mean, for example, like Magic Draft or Hearthstone Draft, imagine if you had like a card draft game that had a pre-commit, like a pre-choice between any of the actual drafting. That wouldn't really make sense, right? I mean, that's complete nonsense because you just see the same picks every time. Now, if you look at Hearthstone Draft, which is a decent example, you know, you have a draft of like 3 heroes, right, at the start. And you don't, if you could choose whatever hero you wanted, you'd see, well, it depends on the meta, but usually like Rogue, Mage, or sometimes Paladin just being, you know, play rated at, it wouldn't be 100% because players are themselves flawed. Mathematically, it should be 100%, but it would be like 70, 80, 90%. It would be something ridiculous, right? And there's a reason you don't do that. Now, you might say, well, but Swim, you can't really draft Underlords at the start because there's only 2 of them. That's true, and I'm going to get to that. Basically, I think that the fact that there's only 2 of them, you know, the fact that it prevents that as a possibility is in and of itself a bit of a flaw. But what would make a bit more sense is being able to pick your Underlord maybe after a certain point in time. What I would say right now is like, and this is not how I would have designed the Underlords in the first place probably, but like given the situation we're in, the best solution is probably to have them drop on the board on like round 10 or arguably round 15. Basically, you know, you play the game and then on round 10 you pick your Underlord and their talent, right? Or something like that, which again, is not necessarily how I would have designed them from scratch, but is probably the simplest change to make them actually make a bit more sense. So when you think about how that would look is like, you know, when you're playing the first 10 rounds of the game, you're making decisions knowing your Underlord is going to be at a certain point, and this will have, you know, not a constricting impact on your decision making. It'll be quite the opposite. You'll be able to pick whatever you want, and then, you know you'll have the Underlord later. Like if you're in one comp, you'll be in, you know, one Underlord, and if you're in another, you'll be in another. And play rates will feel a little more diversified because of that. Now, there's a big asterisk there, and the big asterisk is right now that single solution might not even do anything without another solution, which is that there's not enough diversity, I would say, between these two. They're sort of designed, in terms of all of their talents, they're designed to be pre-committed, right? Which is to say they're designed to be generalized and not specialists. And I really, really don't like that. I don't like anything about that. Because, I mean, it means you can pre-commit without getting, like, punished. But it also means, I mean, again, there will be a mathematically superior one. There's lower situationality around the Underlords. What I would do, and there's a lot of different ways to have done this, but it would make a lot more sense to have a higher degree of situationality and then give them timing, pickable timing, that makes it so that you can pick in a situation, not at the start of the game, but, you know, let's say round 10. It didn't have to be round 10, but that's an easy example. There's so many ways to do it, right? And in doing so, you'd have a draft game that is sort of embracing its own fundamental mechanics rather than sort of, I guess, pretending they don't exist. Because, yeah, the idea of player agency, like, at the start of the entire game, before any probability has happened, just can never really make sense in a game like this. Because it's always going to be just too solvable, right? The probability has to happen first, and also probably last. I mean, again, the player RNG wants to be kind of sandwiched, right? Probably most importantly that it happens after the probability and not before. A really good example of this in another context, just for this principle I'm talking about, is Mask of Madness. So Mask of Madness is an item that I've talked about a bit before. I think it kind of underwent a timing flaw, and timing is so important in games like this. It really is. You have to understand, timing is everything. So Mask of Madness used to be a tier 2 item. And as a tier 2 item, it was actually pretty well designed. And maybe they wanted to buff up a bit of its stats, and I think that's fine. They could have given it a bit more lifesteal without changing it. But as a tier 2 item, it's dropping on like round 2 or round 3 sometimes. And as the probability happens earlier, you're in round 2 or round 3, suddenly you're like, okay, this probability has happened. Now I can use my agency. I can think of a plan, and I can be like, okay, I have this mask on tier 3. Or on turn 3, let me think about going, not necessarily assassins, but one of the like several comps that can use mask, right? Where as it is right now, the probability happens just like entirely after, right? How it is right now is Mask of Madness dropping on tier 3 is like, okay, I'm in whatever I'm in. I'm in assassins, I'm in hunters, I'm in mages, I'm in whatever I'm in. Round 10 comes around, round 15 comes around, and then on round 20 I'll probably hit mask or I won't. If I'm in assassins, I'm delighted to see mask. I'm pissed off if I don't see mask. If I'm in something that can't use mask, mask is just a complete brick, right? And I can't even pick it, and that feels pretty bad, right? If anything, mask is also so powerful that it almost does force you to... It does to a degree, not entirely, but to a degree, it does kind of force you to pick a comp that has some way of utilizing it, right? Which is pretty unhealthy. It makes the meta kind of revolve around it just because you won't know whether you'll get it or not. And it also feels really, really bad if you're in something like Assassins that is dependent on mask, and then you just don't hit it, because you have to choose after it has happened. Right. So when I say like sandwich player decision between probability, it's true that you do want some stuff probability to happen after the player decision, but for the most part, like most of the probability should be front loaded, right? So maybe sandwich is kind of a bad example. But the point is that the mask change is another change that kind of makes no sense, right? Again, the whole point is you want the probability to precede the decision, and changing mask to tier 3 and introducing Underlords that are pickable on turn 0 just make literally no sense, right? Like, what's the concept behind these decisions? Like, and a lot of people are cluing into the general idea here. The general idea being, like, what are Underlords adding to the game? People are confused. I see it on Reddit. It's like, what are Underlords adding? People do understand that it feels like they're not really adding much. They're just, like, units that fight on your board. Another thing is I don't really like how they interact with micro gameplay decisions. In particular, micro gameplay is just like fights that happen on the board, whereas the macro gameplay would be the decisions you make as a player, the paths you choose, the units you find, the probabilities that you're playing with, maybe your economy, stuff like that. The fact that they fight for just the board instead of like giving you powers as a player is very strange, and probably not what I would have done either. I mean, one thing, I was looking at Underlords, and you might have seen a video of this, or you might have seen it live on the stream, but before we knew what the Underlords were, this was like 2 months ago, I was sitting around like theory crafting like what they could be. And the first step is I was like, okay, what does the game need? Because that should always be the first step when you're thinking about adding a new mechanic. You don't want to just add something because it's cool, and it could be, you know, who knows. You want to think like, okay, what does the game need, right? And I was thinking, okay, well, right now there's a fundamental imbalance between roll value and level value, which is to say, like, you know, some builds, for the past few months, we've seen too many builds just want to level up and push levels. That's just been the way to play, and it feels hard to balance. And also, I was thinking at the time, I was thinking with duos coming out, if they're gonna make it like they did in Auto Chess, which they did effectively, they used pretty much the same formula where you can trade units, then 3-starring will kind of be too powerful, right? So you've got a situation where you've got 2 modes that you have to balance, and roll value and level value are really difficult to balance perfectly, right? It's so hard to create a situation where both are going to be able to exist in harmony. When one is a little too strong, it's a little too strong. So I was thinking, okay, that's a problem that the Underlords could solve. How exactly might they be engineered to solve this? And I was thinking, like, okay, they're introducing 2 Underlords. They could have each like the talents could represent like macro gameplay mechanics that would basically allow you to control different options, if that makes sense. So, for example, certain talents could be associated with like, you know, rolling at a higher, like for more value. And there's a lot of different ways you can express this, right? For example, the ability to get a talent that's not pre-chosen, by the way, something that would have some degree of RNG, but some amount of talent that is going to effectively increase the roll value. Now, how it does that, there's a lot of different ways it could do that. It could give you, like, you know, the first roll per turn could be discounted 1 gold or something. That would be very strong, and it would have to be, the opportunity cost would have to be very high. But it could be, you know, some minor probability tiny tweak in finding units that you already have a lot of, or something like that, something that increases your ability to get 3 stars, maybe just like, you know, gives you a unit of choice or something. But basically, the dichotomy of this game, Underlords, any game in the genre, is that there's 2 ways of playing it. You can play it like constructed, or you can play it like draft. That's kind of the appeal, because it's a drafter game, but if you want, you can play it kind of like constructed, sort of. And that's a large part of the appeal of these games, is that they're very flexible and you can do whatever you want, right? And we see constructed being expressed by roll value, and drafts being kind of like level up. And the problem is usually draft, there's not enough good top tier units that the draft strategies, the level strategies, because there's just a handful of good units, they end up using a lot of the same good units every time. So it doesn't feel like draft, right? You wouldn't call that draft, but that's kind of what it's supposed to be by design, right? And there's There's a lot you can do in terms of trying to design like two Underlords and their talents that you're offered kind of randomly around empowering both of these strategies, so that like if you hit like, let's say you're kind of early on, you hit like a good role value talent or something like that, that can force you into a specific direction. Let's say this drops in like round 3 or possibly round 10, depending on how a lot of things look, maybe. But something that has the ability to be found earlier, or that you can, like, you know, like a draft of 3. And that's another thing about the talents. It kind of like, it gives you too much control, right? Because the way the talents are currently set up, again, is also very nonsensical with a draft. You just pick them every time. There's no draft. There's no like choose a set of 3. It's just like every single time you're seeing the same ones on every turn. And the thing is, players always think they want more control. But at the end of the day, you have to understand, more control is less skill. That's just how it is, right? More control, and you think that's backwards, because that sounds backwards. But when you have more control, you do the same thing every time. You frantically Google, like, what's the best fucking path? What should I do every game? And you do that, like, every game. When you have too much control, you will do the thing you have too much control over in basically every game, because you'll choose the best thing mathematically, right? And counters don't really exist in a game like this. What does exist is the situationality of the probability that you've had up until that point, which you can only have if you're willing to give up a bit of your player control, right? You need to have less control over these things. Underlords are pickable before anything happens, and their talents are the same every time, and neither of those makes any sense, right? Okay. But yeah, I mean, if you have like the talents come down, you know, maybe somewhat earlier, and maybe they're a bit more drafty, then you can have something that would incentivize someone to go for role value or level value in a situation to kind of like automatically balance them, right? The most important thing about a game is that you create its fundamental rules to be balanceable. I've mentioned this on stream a lot. The idea, it's not about balanced. Balanced is a byproduct, it's a symptom. You can get that, it's very superficial. You can make a game balanced. And that's kind of what they're doing right now, right? They're looking at NSX and Hobgen play rate, and they're like, okay, let's nerf NSX and let's buff Hobgen. And they're making it a bit more balanced. But it's never going to be very, it's going to be really hard for these two to actually end up in a state where, even though, the thing is, their power level can be very close, but their play rate will still be really far away. Right? That's the problem. The problem is they're not balanceable. The problem is they're designed in a way that's going to always skew their play rate, even if their, you know, win rate is pretty close, right? Because win rate and play rate are not necessarily the same thing. As a dev, your goal is not to balance the win rate. Actually, it's to balance the play rate. And that's, again, something that might be kind of counterintuitive for a lot of you guys as players, because you might be like, well, win rate's the most important thing. Well, win rate is usually a function of play rate. The thing to understand about these Underlords, how they're designed, they can have like a 53 versus 47% win rate, and with those win rates can lead to like a 65 and 35% play rate. Because you're just going to choose the best one. And as a dev, that's a failure. You don't want a 65-35 play rate. Because that's your end goal. Your end goal is diversity. The win rate doesn't matter if the play rate's just going to end up skewed like that, right? Again, I'll say it one more time. Balancing play rate is your end goal as a developer, and win rate is a means to that end. It's important as a means to that end, but it's not the end goal, right? So you can make their win rate as balanced as you want, and it's not really going to change things, because they're designed in a way that doesn't really make sense and isn't really cohesive with the idea of the game as a whole, right? So my point is, this is kind of what I was theory crafting before. With this idea of like having a problem to solve. Again, that's the most important first step. If you're introducing a new mechanic, you're like, okay, what's the gap we're trying to fill, right? Because people are looking at these Underlords and saying like, well, they don't really add anything to the game. And my concern isn't really their impact on the game. My concern is what their intended impact could even have been. Because I look at these and I'm thinking to myself, what was the thought process? Like what? Because the first step, again, as a designer, you want to think like, what's the gap I'm filling? What's the problem I'm solving? And I feel like that step might have been skipped. Like, what's the problem you're solving? The problem you're solving is, with these Underlords, I would say the biggest thing is making them a bit more unique compared to the competition. You know, I mean, the game was announced when, like, TFT and even, like, you know, Johto auto chess and stuff was coming out, and they were like, well, we got to make ourselves more unique. I don't know. I mean, to be honest, I don't really know the answer to that question. Like, I look at these heroes, and all I can imagine is devs kind of looking at them and being like, wouldn't it be cool if, right? That's the problem. The problem is, I see, I mean, maybe there's a reason out there that I can't think of, but I just look at these Underlords, and the only thing I can imagine is, wouldn't it be cool if? I feel like that's kind of where the conversation had to have started, which is, of course, not where you want to start a conversation in design. That doesn't make any sense. I will mention one thing about balanceability. I was talking about this before. This is why I think Jail's genius. Jail makes a lot of things more balanceable. I'm still on board with that. I think Jail is a genius concept. I think its implementation is really poor. You guys might have noticed that. A lot of people have been complaining about Jail because it makes good stuff even better. Well, Jail was always going to make good stuff better. That is one of the byproducts of a random selected Jail. It will always make the draft strategy better than the constructed, period. That was always going to be a byproduct. The problem is, to incorporate something like Jail, you have to nerf the draft strategy before you add the Jail. Otherwise, it's just going to make the meta imbalance even larger, right? Jail is not the culprit here. Jail is not, like, you know, doing bad. And, of course, the algorithm for Jail needs to be tweaked as well. I mean, just in today's random recording, we see Tinker being jailed. It's a really funny meme, Scrappy Inventors. I think they've spent, like, 3 days unjailed since the 3 weeks the patch has hit. It's more than 3. It's, like, 4 or 5, but it's still a funny meme. Like, you just don't see this alliance in the game anymore because of how the Jail algorithm works. Which, for those of you guys who don't know, it can never ban more than one... It can never ban more than one of a specific tag right now. It always bans 8 heroes, and it always bans up to 1 of each tag. So the problem with that, for example, the reason why Scrappy Inventors are so jailable is like, well, I mean, it's usually going to ban an inventor. If it doesn't, you know, and if it does, I guess you hope it's Gyro, but even then you don't want Gyro to be banned. And if it bans, like, let's say it jails something like Witch Doctor, right? Like, if Witch Doctor gets jailed, then Warlock's out of the pool, so it can't jail Alchemist, right? And if it jails like an Assassin, it can't jail Bounty Hunter, and if it jails a Hunter or a Deadeye, it can't jail Sniper, right? So suddenly it's like, because of how the jail algorithm works, it's trying to too hard to be too even, and because of that, you have an incredibly high likelihood of a Scrappy Inventor getting jailed out every day, just because there's a few of them that have the same tags, and they're not very protected by the algorithm, right? But yeah, I actually think jail is, in theory, the best idea to have come of this patch. I think it makes the game a lot more balanceable. I love the idea of, like, the daily appeal. Needs better implementation. Obviously, Jail in its current form has a negative impact on the game. Nobody's disagreeing with that. Okay. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot more we can talk about in terms of, like, where the design has fallen off. I think I'm mostly done talking about, like, the Underlords themselves. Like, you guys understand, like, a lot of the flaws here. I mean, there's a few more things I can say, but what's the point? You can look at a lot of the new alliances, and I think, like, again, the biggest problem with Underlords is, I would say, the game just doesn't seem to understand its own fundamental mechanics. This has actually been a problem that I've actually seen in pretty much all the games I've played. You guys have seen me play both Gwent and Artifact. Gwent and Artifact are both games that have very unique concepts, and then their card design doesn't really respect those concepts, right? Like, you look at Gwent and Artifact and you're like, huh, these are cards that play on different rules, and then you look at the actual card design of those games, and all you see is, like, you know, basically the same sort of card design you would see in something like Magic the Gathering or Hearthstone. It's very uninspired. It's not really fitting the fundamental rules that the game sets up, right? And Artifact has a couple of things like, you know, teleport scrolls and the initiative cards, like get initiative cards, I guess. But for the most part, it's not really, they aren't cohering with, like, the rules that the game set up in a very powerful way. Now you might say that's more about the rules that the game set up than the card design, and that might be true. I mean, that's a fair argument, but the point is the two are not in conjunction, right? And you see the same problem with Gwent. It's like, in the original Gwent pool, there were a couple of units that felt very in sync with the fundamentals, and those I can think off the top of my head, the original vanilla Siri card and Bork, or Villain Tretmirth as he was later renamed. Those cards are really cool, and especially when gold immunity existed in the past, those cards, a lot of their design just made so much sense with how Gwent was different from other card games, right? Like Ciri goes back to your hand on a losing rounds. Very interesting. You can do a lot with that. And Boric, plays with like the timer. It plays with, the even card strength. There's a lot going on there. You could say Scorch as well. But, the point is that for the most part, the average Gwent card does not really do much interesting stuff with the design that it sets up, right? It's mostly just like, plus damage here, minus damage here, right? Especially these days post Homecoming. And I see the same problems here. Again, you've seen that example in Underlords where I think Underlords just don't agree with anything this game has set up at all. But I really see that in the alliances as well. So they added a couple new alliances that I think just kind of, the ratios behind them just don't really make sense. Hilariously enough, Insect is actually the most sensible of the new alliances. It actually makes more sense than I gave it credit for. I was thinking Insect would be really bad at first. I don't really like Insect Hunters. I think that build is just weak. But Insects actually ended up being a lot more powerful than I originally thought. And the idea of like a 3 of Alliance to complete that gives like a powerful ability is actually fine. That doesn't even have a problem fitting this game. Because there's a lot of situations where you can run it in some like good stuff, or even some like Assassins, because you have 2 free tags that you're just kind of chilling with in Assassins on your 7th and 8th unit. There's not a lot to complete outside of Assassins, largely in part because Elusive is pre-completed with, the advent of Anti-Mage being an elusive assassin, right? So we look at the new alliances, and you look at Brute. Now, Brute, I could talk for like a minute or two about like why Brute just doesn't make any sense at all. Every single thing about Brute just doesn't... basically every single thing about Brute doesn't really make sense. It's a very confused alliance, right? Like, okay, so Brute scales super high, right? And scaling is very important when you're first looking at alliance. Scaling is like how much the tiers multiply off of each other, right? So you look at human, it scales very poorly. You look at scaled, it scales very poorly, no pun intended. And that's because these are support alliances. Support alliances are defined by their low scaling, right? This scales very high, which says you kind of want this to be like a 4-unit alliance. The scaling says that, but then you look at the actual units themselves and the unit count, there's not a lot of synergies built in between these units, and there's only 5 of them, and that says it kind of wants to be a pair alliance, right? That's kind of a problem. The fact that it's like percentage damage debuff over here, it says it's supposed to be like late game. The fact that it's flat damage over here, it says it's supposed to be early game, right? It's frontline units who are all fairly tanky, so it's kind of it's sort of meant to be like a 4-core frontline tank build to some kind of backline. And we've seen this in the past. We've seen like 4 Scrappies with a backline. We've seen like 4 Knights with a backline. And the problem is the ability it isn't a tank ability. So it doesn't even do that, right? It's a damage ability. And you might say it's kind of a tank ability because it reduces the damage that they take. But of course it kind of doesn't, because most of the damage is coming from the backline, which these melee users aren't targeting, right? So it doesn't really reduce much damage. Basically everything about this ability is in direct conflict to what it was. I want to actually mention, this is a tangent, but this is a really, really important tangent. I was just talking about like the 4-core frontline. There was a meta. It was basically the We Play meta. This was before 2.5 months ago. They amped up level value to a ridiculous degree for no reason. And you guys might have noticed, like on a lot of my streams, basically since then I've just been jamming the same build in a lot of games. Yeah, I'm sure you guys complain about like another swim stream, another game where he plays just like warrior good stuff, 3 warrior, 6 warrior, whatever. Who cares? It doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter that it's warriors. It can be whatever. And the problem is like they are forcing you to play like this as of 2.5 months ago for no reason whatsoever. They took a meta that was actually very solid and very good, and they just made it like you have to level to 9 on 21 every game forever. They did this like 2.5 months ago, and they still haven't reverted that. They made it worse with the patches, worse now than it's ever been, but even before this, you had to do that. And that feels really bad, right? I've been kind of skeptical of this update for a while. Like, I wanted to believe it could be good. I was thinking for the longest time, for that like 2-month period, I was like, well, I wanted to give Valve the benefit of the doubt. I was like, okay, this big update sounds pretty hype. I assume maybe the meta is just in a really bad state right now because they have everyone working on the big update, so it's like when the big update comes out, they'll be able to rebalance that meta, and they just kind of don't care about the current meta because a lot of players have left already. I guess that's fine. I don't think it would have taken a lot of resources, personally, to have solved the meta. I think it's actually a really, really easy solution. But, hey, I mean, that's okay, you know? Let's see what the big patch happens. And then the patch happened, and it was actually hype. I liked the patch. There was a lot of cool, fresh new stuff. I didn't like the long-term design directions, right? The long-term is kind of what I'm worried about. But, I mean, it was fun to play for a while, and duos was really hype, right? Duos in particular. I have no problems at all with duos, basically. I love duos. It's great for the game. But then they balanced patched a week later, and it didn't really end up fixing anything, right? So we have a really imbalanced meta and devs that, as far as I can tell, are extremely unaware of what the problem is, which is kind of crazy to me. Because again, we've been in a hyper imbalanced meta for like 3 months now, and I have no idea how that's been able to be continued. It's pretty mind-boggling. Okay. But again, I mean, this isn't just a fucking, like, rip on Valve thing. They do some things very well. I do think, like, JL, as an example, is genius. I have zero problems with duos at all. This is a critical video. I'm critiquing things. That means I'm going to be focusing more on the negatives than the positives, right? So, apologies if I'm being, like, a Debbie Downer, but that is the nature of a critiquing video. That's always what it's going to be. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about, about that process of them just ramping up tier 4 odds for no reason. And by the way, a lot of like very dedicated like Lords players or community players left the game when they did that. Some of them haven't even come back for this big update, right? Like, a lot of people are identifying problems like right now. The real problems were like 2.5 months ago. I've been complaining about it this entire 2 months. If you watch my content, if you watch my streams, you know that I've been complaining about it. Everyone's been complaining about it. This isn't news. And it's like, I don't know. Anyway, the point is, the reason why I went off on the tangent right now is because the brute conversation was, I was talking about like the 4-core frontline build. The meta before, people forget. And I've seen some comments that have been saying just some nonsense stuff like, well, but leveling is always going to be good. In Dota Auto Chess, leveling aggressively was really good, and you can't make a game that doesn't have good leveling. It's impossible. That's really dumb. So before we had this level up meta, the meta we had was kind of like, there was some aggressive leveling if you're win streaking, and that was kind of already like they needed to solve that, but it wasn't super common, right? It wasn't something you had to do every game. The meta was kind of at a point where you were designing comps by mixing frontline elements with backline elements, right? So you would have like the 4-core Knight frontline with like Demon Hunter backline, or 4-core like Scrappy frontline with like Mage backline, right? You kind of would take a frontline of one comp and the backline of another, right? And it was probably the healthiest meta we've had. We call it like the We Play meta. That was the patch that, you know, they did the We Play update. I actually really liked the We Play update, by the way. I like the free rerolls on Lost, personally. Some people don't. The We Play update, I like almost everything about it, actually. It's kind of crazy. Like, it did a lot of really cool things. It created a pretty fantastic and balanced meta that lasted for a really long time. The meta didn't die because players like figured it out. The meta died because the devs just ramped up tier 4 odds by like 10%, right? For no reason. And that's why I wanted to talk about it, because I just happened to be mentioning like why Brute can't work, because it's not a 4-core frontline, and 4-core frontlines used to be a thing you cared about, right? Now in these days, like the only frontline that matters is like the Warriors, because the tier 4s are a little too easy to level. You know, you're already in level value, and of course this is exacerbated by so many factors, like a lot of obvious stuff like Underlords being scaled off of your level and the JL system. Everything is compounding right now to make good stuff like tier absolute 0, but at the end of the day, you know, I mean, after the nerfs that came in like last week, a lot of people are playing like assassins. So I mean, obviously this isn't something, this isn't a long-term problem right now. These are balance issues, but they're symptoms of a lot of the long-term problems, right? And that's really important to understand. The balance issues themselves are not really what I'm talking about. So we look at Brute, and Brute, everything about Brute is very confused. And I think the main thing to understand about like the alliances and how they're supposed to be, I personally feel there can be a couple exceptions in a couple places, but I feel like for the most part, alliances should be designed in one of three ways. They should be main comps. A main comp alliance is one that scales very well, super high scaling, and usually involves 6 units. So that's going to be Primordial, it's going to be Warriors. It probably can't be Warlock. Maybe there could be some enabler for 6 Warlock one day, but Assassins, Hunters, you know, a main comp alliance. Depending on how you look at it, I could even like look at Scrappy as like somewhat of a main comp for sure. Yeah, so Scrappy, absolutely. Elusive, it's weak right now, but it's designed to be a main comp alliance, right? So there's a main comp alliance, there's support alliance. So support alliance are stuff with really poor scaling. You basically, these exist to be paired, right? Humans, although in mages, obviously, mages kind of create weird exceptions to a lot of things. Because mages break the bill, but mages use 4 humans just because they need that minute per second, and the humans are also just built into the mages themselves. You use like DK or Kunker for the 4th human. Heartless is another support alliance, although nowadays maybe that can't be true anymore now that it's 3 armor instead of 5. So Heartless is another support alliance. Healer is kind of designed to be a support alliance. I'm pretty confident what Valve is going to do with Healer is they're just going to make it a 2-4 alliance instead of a 3. That seems pretty obvious. People on Reddit are suggesting that. Honestly, it's a good suggestion. They can tweak this number if they feel like they have to. But this is designed to be a support alliance, right? It's supposed to be like 2 units instead of 3. So that's another kind. And Trolls are technically a support alliance, but they, you know, obviously are more about buffing themselves than other things. So they're not a full support alliance. But you'll notice there's not a ton of support alliances out there. As mentioned, like Scaled is a support alliance. But for the most part, alliances aren't really supportive, right? There's only a handful of them, and I think there could be more. To be honest, like for example, what I would do with something like Shaman is I would turn this into a support alliance. I'm not sure exactly how. I probably wouldn't have like a chicken % chance on all my units. I don't think I would do that, but they would give them some kind of support, right? Like something that scales with you know, the shamans you have. Could literally be anything, like just something that buffs your entire team in one way. And you can imagine like so many different ways of doing that, right? That's not really hard to do. But yeah, I mean, obviously balancing that is a separate issue, but I just like I look at a lot of, oh, okay, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. And the third kind of comp is a transitional comp. And these are kind of rare as well. And this is something like 4 Savage is kind of a transitional comp. 6 Savage doesn't scale well enough to be a main comp alliance. It needs better scaling than this, even though it has 6 units. And 4 Savages is like, you know, so transitional comps are, you get them online early. They are usually 4 of comps, actually, but they can sometimes be pair. These are stuff like Druids. These are stuff like Savages. I was looking at Brute originally, and I was thinking it could be a transitional comp, and maybe that's where it is right now. It's hard to say. But, you know, there's not a lot of transitional comps as well. I mean, Druids and Savages, and arguably Healers in their current form, maybe, and arguably Brutes. And that's kind of it, right? There's not really anything else that you can use to transition, right? And any comp that doesn't fit within those 3 has a really, really hard time of being good. So we see Dragon Insect that are playable. Dragon is like, I shouldn't say Dragon. The fact of the matter is that Dragon is like a pair. It's closer to a support alliance than anything else out there, although it doesn't buff your entire team, but it is just a pair that you complete, and it's fairly powerful. So Dragon is exempt. I should, you know, value pair is kind of what I mean by a support alliance, whereas that I like can be value. Insect is an outlier for sure, and that's kind of why I was thinking originally Insect probably wouldn't be good, because it doesn't fit the mold, but it's actually able to be strong enough and fits into comps, Good Stuff and Assassins, which happen to be the 2 best comps in the game right now. Look at that. So Insect is actually able to make it work, surprisingly to me, but it did do it. For the most part, anything that doesn't fit in those molds is not a real comp, is not a real alliance, and should, in my opinion, kind of have no business being an alliance. So this is stuff like Shaman. Inventor doesn't count because Inventor is just built into Scrappy. It's just embedded in there. So stuff like Shaman is just really like weird. Healer in its current form being a 3 of instead of a support pair, although I'm sure they'll change that. Heartless is weird because Heartless is designed to be a support alliance in theory, because it's just like, it's a very poor scaling thing. All enemies lose armor. You want that to be a pair. But then they added 2 more units to this alliance, so it has 7 units in this support alliance. and then they made the pair value weaker. So now it's weird. Heartless may be like a more of a 4 of sometimes. I don't know. I don't really like this design personally. Although I do agree that pair Heartless had to get nerfed. Sure, that's true. Demon is obviously, you know, very strange. Brute and Brawny and Bloodbound are also like good examples of like stuff that doesn't really make a lot of sense, right? Because it's not really transitional. So I said Shaman, Brute, and Brawny. And notice all 3 of these are 4 of alliances, right? And that's a large part of my point. A 4 of alliance can only really work as a transitional alliance. If it's support, it wants to be a pair. And if it's a main comp, it wants to be probably a 6. Some 4s, if they're powerful enough, can work as main comps. There was a time where Brawny was very popular. I want to mention it was never really that good, but it was very popular, and a lot of people thought it was good. So, I mean, I guess you could list 4 Brawny as a potential. It's not as if it's impossible for a 4 core comp to not like to find a place, but I view it as really kind of middling in a way that doesn't really make sense, right? You know, it feels like one of the first things you want to do is like break down like what different categories of comps you want there to be, right? It's kind of like heroes in Dota, right? You have like supports, you have carries, and like, I mean, obviously there are times where, you know, those definitions get muddled depending on the timing and the meta and the patch, and there are heroes that have muddled definitions within those that are able to be good. Of course, there's going to be exceptions, but at the end of the day, an important thing to realize as a designer is like the first thing is split your thing into categories and make sure that categories are being followed, right? And it seems really weird. There's only like 2 or 3 support alliances in the entire game, and there's only like 2 transition alliances in the entire game. And there's a lot of main comps, and that seems very strange to me. It's like it feels like it would make more sense if there was like 1 or 2 more support alliances, and I mean maybe more transitional alliances. And the idea of something like Shaman or something like Brute feels like it just doesn't really make enough sense. And they buff these numbers big. They buff this like an incredible amount. And some people really like playing Brute on ladder right now. And that's not really my point. I'm not really saying like they can't buff these numbers big enough that these heroes won't see play. Of course they can, and that's what they did. But it's still really clunky. It's going to be too hard for these to be existing in a form of like balance, right? So I don't know. I mean, the entire design of Brute just doesn't really make sense, and I've never really liked Shaman. Although in fairness, I do like what they've done with Primordials. You guys might actually have keyed on, by the way. Primordials actually used to be one of these alliances that didn't make sense. They were a 4 of with scaling that was really good. Primordials had the single best scaling in the entire game as a 4 of alliance. Made no sense at all, right? And then they gave it a 3rd tier, and suddenly this is actually a comp. This turns into a main comp all of a sudden. High scaling, 3rd tier, 2 more heroes. Now it's a little, you know, I mean, obviously it's a little jailable, and you need double Ace, so it's kind of rare. But it's an actual thing that makes sense, right? Like this is a thing with the numbers to back it, right? So, I mean, a lot of like the alliance implementations do feel kind of weird, and it does feel to me like a lot of them are uncategorized. Again, like I can't help but thinking that conversation just started with like, wouldn't it be neat, you know? Like they look at like Shadow Demon as a unit, and they're like, let's put Shadow Demon in the game. He's a demon and he's kind of like Heartless, so we'll make him a demon Heartless. We haven't seen that combination before. You know, it's like Pokemon types. You know, the Pokemon makers are like, well, we've never made this typing before. Let's make this typing. It'll be interesting, right? And that's like, I mean, it's good to make unique typing, but it's also important to make stuff that makes sense, right? Like adding more Heartlesses to the game. Heartless isn't a main comp, so it's not really doing as much. And obviously, like Heartless is a weird idea right now. This is a bad example, by the way, because Shadow Demon is actually not that bad. It's a little nitpicky. It's not as if like adding an additional Heartless is bad per se. What I should do is I should look at Brute, because like a lot of these heroes are like, well, they're kind of like warriors and they're kind of like brawnies, but you know, we have so many strength heroes, we have to make a 3rd thing, and then that 3rd thing could just like deal more damage on hits. It's kind of like you want to start from the end, right? Start from the finish line. Start looking, you know, when you're doing a maze, You start a bit from the front and you start a bit from the end, and then you want them to intersect at the end. That's how you do a maze, right? And that's kind of how you should do design too, in a way, is that start a little bit at the end. Think about your end goal. Like, what are you accomplishing? What is your impact on the meta and on how players will play the game by adding this to the game? And it feels like it's not really doing anything. Like it's not like a counter to anything. It's not something you can go early. It's very lost and confused. And again, if they buff the numbers up, like, it'll eventually make sense, but it's just not what I would call like compelling design. And yeah, I mean, I guess like that's kind of my biggest problem. A lot of it comes down to the Underlords themselves. A lot of it, I mean, and a lot of like the balance issues, I think, like Target Buddy tier 2 to 3, like what is this? I just don't understand this at all. I understand that Target Buddy's OP and he needs to get nerfed. Everyone agrees with that. That's easy. But like, why make him tier 3? Why not just like lower his stat line? Because he's designed to be something that's useful early and falls off later. And you can lower his stat line to the point where he's not an auto win early. He's pickable early. So why make him tier 3? Because all that does, like, think about what that actually does, you know. And I can talk for longer. I think I'm wrapping up this video, but I can talk for longer about what all of this is. But I mean, as you look at what Target Buddy to tier 3 is, like, you think about what this does. What does this do? It means, okay, you're solving the Target Buddy OP problem. Sure, that's true, but all you're doing is putting an unpickable unit in tier 3, right? Like this unit, you can't really be taking on like round 20 over like most good things. Like, you'll take it over like Healing Word and Dawning Aristal, I guess. That's sure. But brickable items, the tier 3 is so flooded with brickable items now. Like Dawning, Healing Word, Potion Knife are the big 3 culprits, but Mask of Madness is super brickable. Target Buddy's now in this tier. Octarine is very brickable, especially after the nerf in certain comps, depending on what comps you're in. And Bracers, even Assassin's Veil. There's so many brickable items here, right? I'm not sure. I might be wrong about Assassin Veil, but that doesn't matter. The point is, like, so many packs. How many times have you seen a shop on an item shop on around 20 that it's just like, you see the shop and you're like, oh well, I guess I take Target Buddy? That's not really a good feeling, right? Like, why? Like, by making Target Buddy from tier 2 to tier 3, they nerfed both of those tiers, right? It's important to understand that. It's not like they nerfed Target Buddy. They nerfed tier 2 items, and they nerfed tier 3 items too, because they gave it a Target Buddy that you don't want at that point in the game, right? Why not just lower the stats? Because it's designed to be something that's useful in the first like little bit of the game. Why not lower the stats? Like, what's the reasoning behind that decision? It's just, I'm seeing so many decisions that I just can't understand a lot of the logic behind. Except, like, people are really frustrated with Buddy, and even if it's weaker, they might not be happy. They'd rather it just be tier 3. That's so strange to me, right? And I can do this for a long time. If I want to, I can like scroll further down and talk about a lot of decisions. But my point is, like, a lot of things recently, and it feels recent. It feels like, to me, there was some kind of change in the team at a certain point. Because I really liked the We Play update, and I liked a lot of the base game decisions. But yeah, I mean, these recent decisions, I just see a lot of problems with them long term. And again, I want to reiterate, I mean, I guess you already understand this if you stuck through the video this long, but this is not a Metabad Swim Sad video. A lot of people will like immediately look at complaining as something that's like indicative of a short-term symptomatic problem. This is exactly the opposite. This is exactly the opposite. I'm not looking at like symptoms. This is a systemic problem. This is like me looking at these design implications, and I look at the game right now. The game can be like, I mean, you can make it more balanced. You can buff Hobgon and you can buff Brutes, but the problem is, like, the way these mechanics are being implemented into the game just feels like it's going to create a lot of problems in the future as well. And it means that the problems that they're trying to fix now, I mean, they're trying to apply like band-aid solutions on something that there's kind of no band-aid for, right? It's like buffing up Hobgon and nerfing an Essex. Like, these, everything about their design is kind of flawed on a fundamental level. So, like, I don't think that really works, you know? I don't want to clarify. I mean, this all makes me really sad. You guys know I love this game. You guys know I've spent, I mean, I play this game like 60 hours a week for the past like 5 months. That's a lot of hours, right? And I mean, you might point out, like, you know, I've done a bit less for the past like month or two because, you know, the meta has been pretty bad. But I don't know, man. I'm not really like, I'm not trying to dog on this game. And I know a lot of you guys are gonna like be like, oh, you know, swim is attacking something I enjoy. I enjoy it too. I'm not really happy about this either. That makes me pretty sad. I mean, I really want to enjoy this game. It's kind of hard to these days. And so that's basically it. I mean, again, I can go on, but these are kind of like my big points and just examples, random examples in some cases about stuff that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And I really hope that the game is going to be able to get its act together. I mean, again, this is not like an I quit kind of thing. I'm going to keep watching the patch notes and, you know, maybe I'll check in on it from time to time, but I just see a lot of problems, and instead of addressing a lot of the problems that the game has, they're kind of just adding more problems. You know? And that seems to be the biggest problem. No pun intended. But like, you know, I mean, 2 months ago, we've had this problem, like the meta's super good stuffy and imbalanced, and Valve's like, you know, oh, no problem, bro, let's add Underlords to this, which makes it even worse without even fixing the original thing. I don't know. I'm rambling. I'm just saying stuff I've already said. There's nothing more to say. This game could have been so great. Anyway, I mean, I guess that's it. I don't know what else there is to say. I'll try out a lot of other things. I really hope something will happen here that will allow me to get back into this. At this point in time, I will say I would not put money on that happening. Like, I don't have high hopes in terms of probability. I do want it to happen, and I will play this game again if that does happen. I mean, who knows? But until then, it just feels very difficult. And the patch was... I know a lot of you guys will agree with this, but the patch was super hype for a few days, and then, like, you start seeing a lot of problems. Not even just in terms of meta, but even if you're thinking about it, like, a little bit. Not even a lot, but just, like, on a fairly superficial level, you will see a lot of problems with the design. And you see people complaining about that. Everyone's like, why are these Underlords here, you know? Alright, I guess that's all I wanted to say to you guys. I thought, you know... every time I make a video like this, I just get, like, kind of, like, burned by it. But I owe it to you guys, to be honest. I owe it to you guys to talk about, like, what my current plans are and why I feel the way I do. At the very least, I don't know. There's some cool things coming out. I played some Battlegrounds yesterday, and it was actually more fun than I thought it would be. And I'm uploading some videos of that, Hearthstone Battlegrounds, and Runeterra actually looks pretty good. So it'll be a nice break, I guess. Be able to play a lot of different things for the next few weeks. But yeah, I guess I will see you guys during that. If I see you at all. And if you were just here for Underlords, then, well, you probably didn't even make it this far in the video. But maybe our paths will meet again. Maybe in Underlords. But expectations not high. Alright. Bye, guys. This has been a fun little rambly recording. I'm sorry for not keeping this clean. You guys remember when I said it would probably be like a 30-minute rant? Okay. I'll see you guys next time, though.